BLM Brandon, I missed these comments on the day in which they were delivered, but it was Southside Pride Night last week. And in addition to his Nixon comment that's making all the rounds this week, he had this to say, did BLM Brandon, about the city and, the real problem in the city. You know what it is. Yeah, that's right, white supremacy.
Now look, white supremacy is real, y'all.
Say that. Say that.
I'm going to say that one more time.
Say that.
Because in case the city of Chicago don't know, you got a black mayor with a black wife, black children on the west side of Chicago. And all of these other administrations that shut down our schools, that shut down public housing, that raided the pensions, that sold off the parking meter, that sold off the Skyway. Those people ran this city to the ground, and now they expect a brother to fix it in a year.
Say it.
Well, guess what? We're off to a great start, and I look forward to fixing they mess, building up our communities for the next 23 freaking years. God bless you, Chicago. Southside.
Yeah, no, things are going well. BLM Brandon Johnson, black mayor, black wife. We actually had a black mayor with a black wife just 4 years ago, the previous one, Lori Lightfoot. So I don't know. I guess that doesn't count for BLM Brandon and ascribing some of the blame as well. And Lori Lightfoot was a white supremacist. I think that's a tough charge to make out. But anyway, BLM Brandon, when the Marxist revolutionary becomes the inside guy, can he shake off the trappings of being an apparatchik for the teachers union? And the answer so far in the first year is no. And it's going to be put to the test next month, isn't it? August 19th to the 22nd. Those are the dates of the DNC. And Wall Street Journal writing about the summer of resistance that these Marxist, neo-Marxist revolutionaries like BLM Brandon used to be, perhaps still is, have planned for Chicago and for Milwaukee and for major cities around the country in advance of November. The most detailed protest plans for Chicago come from a group called Behind Enemy Lines, a self-styled anti-imperialist organization with a small but hardcore following that endorses militancy. Beyond Enemy Lines has demanded that Chicago cancel the DNC and asked supporters to, quote, escalate for Gaza, unquote, every Friday until the convention and, quote, make life miserable for the people inviting these criminals to Chicago. Well, that would be fair, since the people inviting these criminals to Chicago are making life miserable for the rest of Chicago residents. Yeah. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. And perhaps a dry... And, oh, by the way, things are already afoot in preparation before I get to Milwaukee. The 10 City between the Dan Ryan Expressway and the 1100 block of South Des Plaines, that's being cleared out. That's cleared out this week, permanently cordoned off. The 22 people who have been living in that tent city, the blue and orange tents you see, have been moved to the former Tremont Hotel on Chestnut. What, the St. Regis wasn't available? Pritzker didn't offer the Hyatt? Interesting. So they're trying to spruce up the city, a la San Francisco, preparing for the arrival of President Xi last year. Sort of the same dynamic. What can we learn from how things are handled up in Milwaukee for the RNC, which begins in earnest Monday? Maybe, because obviously they're going to be dealing with some of these same groups, and they may be even more antagonistic towards the Republicans than they plan to be against Pritzker, BLM Brandon, and company if they don't get what they want in terms of their quote-unquote protest rights. For more on what's going on up north, maybe what Chicago Pauls can learn if they're so inclined, please be joined by Eric Toney, who's the Fond du Lac County District Attorney. And as I mentioned, Fond du Lac, the home of the Republican Party, the birthplace of the Republican Party, because it was in Ripon, which is in Fond du Lac. Eric Toney, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan, thanks for having me, and always love talking about Fond du Lac County being the birthplace of the Republican Party with a little white schoolhouse.
Yes, exactly right. All right, very good. And so what is I've seen stories about Secret Service considering measures, new measures to uh, provide space for protesters, but not make it so near the convention activities and so on and so forth. I mean, what's your assessment of how Milwaukee has prepared in conjunction with Secret Service, of course, and what potential spillover you're looking at in the suburbs that people are preparing for?
Well, we know they're trying to balance First Amendment rights of those that are coming to protest because there will be many people that are going to be peaceful and trying to exercise their First Amendment rights. But we also know there are going to be those professional anarchists that are going to try and cause chaos, disruption, and destruction to property. And so we've got a security perimeter that's set up in the protest zone. We'll have essentially a parade route that'll be about, I think, 4 to 5 blocks away from the security perimeter with a stage that's set up. And a federal judge recently ruled that those protesters are not going to be able to get inside that security perimeter. And so that ruling helps protect the First Amendment rights of those us conservatives that are going to be going to the convention next week. And one thing I would like to point out, if anybody is considering turning those protests violent, Wisconsin law enforcement was tested pretty heavily back in 2020, if you recall the protests in the wake of Jacob Blake and the destruction that happened in Kenosha in the wake of that. And there was mutual aid with law enforcement from all across Wisconsin helping keep the citizens and businesses of Kenosha and surrounding areas safe. And so I'm sure many of those same law enforcement officers are going to be in Milwaukee for mutual aid to help ensure that people remain safe.
What kind of communication is there between like City of Milwaukee Police and suburban police departments, the Milwaukee County State's Attorney and suburban county state's attorneys?
So one of the things I've seen that I think some of the efforts are going to be, at least in the city of Milwaukee, that the local Milwaukee law enforcement will be more front-facing, being more familiar with the city, and they'll likely have some of those mutual aid officers acting as support in various circumstances. And so our law enforcement in Wisconsin are incredibly well trained. And then from there, it's incumbent on our prosecutors, whether it be from the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office or from the Eastern District United States Attorney's Office, to ensure that those that are breaking the law, that are endangering the safety and security of citizens and damage to our businesses, are held accountable through the justice system. We have to make sure that deterrence is there, that if those that come to turn those peaceful protests into violence will be held accountable.
And the relationship leading up to next week's convention between the political leadership of the city of Milwaukee and the RNC and the Republican Party in Wisconsin, because of course this is not like in Chicago where you're all on the same side. You've got a Dem mayor and a Dem power structure in Milwaukee, and that's where you have the Republican convention. How has that been working?
So I'm one of our delegates for the convention, and when we, probably about a month or so ago, when we had our state Republican convention, we were already getting some updates on what the security situation would look like. I know Senator Ron Johnson has been involved in trying to ensure that security is bolstered as well. And one thing also to keep in mind, back in 2020, the Democrat National Convention was to be in Milwaukee before COVID, and so there were already plans put in place for that convention. And so I think some of the similar plans have been adopted and modified as time moved forward, where I think there is a pretty strong plan, and there's been communication that we've seen filter down to us as delegates as to what that security will look like, where the perimeter will be, and some guidance for those delegates just on some of the safety situations and understanding where that parade route may be if they'd like to avoid those areas.
Is there any concern, though, that, for people that that do cross the line and violate the law, if that occurs? And I mean, Milwaukee's got a violent crime problem like Chicago does, not as pronounced, but still significant. And as you said, you've got, and I mentioned behind enemy lines, these professional anarchist organizations that are essentially promoting violence or certainly lawlessness. Are you worried at all? Milwaukee County State's Attorney won't prosecute, will give these people a walk, and so you won't have the accountability you need to remove people who are breaking the law from the convention area.
There's always a question of what the district attorney, John Chisholm, for Milwaukee County will do, and that's where, my hope is that his office will do the right thing. He's not running for re-election. One of his deputy district attorneys, Kent Laverne, will be taking over the office. He's running unopposed, and that will come in January. And so there will be some shakeup within that office, and my hope is that Kent also has that same philosophy, that he'll ensure that those that break the law are held accountable, and we'll be working with District Attorney Chisholm to ensure that happens, as well as the Eastern District U.S. Attorney's Office, if any of those violations can be charged federally.
Thinking about the November election, we were talking about this with my newsman, Mike Scott, just before the break. He mentioned that the Fond du Lac County Executive has raised the specter of bringing ballot drop boxes back. Is that the case? And since more generally, since Wisconsin was such a hot spot in terms of the administration of the election in 2020, what's your confidence level about the integrity of the election there this year?
So our Supreme Court, interestingly enough, about 2 years ago, we had a more conservative Supreme Court, and they disallowed drop boxes based on their review of statutes. And then 2 years later, the Supreme Court has taken a liberal turn, and they reversed that decision from only 2 years ago, where we're seeing this Wisconsin Supreme Court, which has gone very liberal, making these changes on cases that were just recently decided, including even changing the legislative maps that were only decided a few years ago as well. On Dropbox specifically, I haven't seen anything from our county executive here in Fond du Lac County on Dropboxes, but we know that they're legal. They're going to be used in the elections this year. And one of the challenges that we face in Wisconsin, we have a high concentration of liberal voters in Dane County, where Madison, Wisconsin is located, as well as in Milwaukee County. And so the left is able to mobilize their voters much more easily in those two areas. And we have many of our voters, conservative voters, that are in rural areas within Wisconsin. And so if you're living in Madison or Milwaukee, with the early voting periods that their clerks have, folks have the ability to go and vote much more easily than our conservative voters may have in rural areas. So that's an area that we have to figure out how to catch up and make sure that our rural voters have greater access to voting, because we have to use the same rules that the left is using if we're going to start winning elections. And so that's an area that we have to improve on.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if they're drop boxes, there's nothing that says Republicans can't use them too, right? I mean, it's sort of like the same conversation we had about vote by mail programs and the like. We have to have the infrastructure to take advantage of the rules of the game as they're laid out.
Exactly. And if we don't, it's like doing these elections with one arm tied behind our back. And one of the nice things, people, I think, understandably have a concern if they put their ballot in a box or they put it in the mail. You never know what will happen. We see some of those horror stories with the post office where ballots are found or they're not delivered on time. One thing voters can do in Wisconsin, if they submit their ballot through absentee by mail, they can check to see if it's been received or not, to make sure that their clerk has their ballot. So there are some safeguards if somebody wants to monitor their ballot that they've submitted by mail, because we need. And one of the other things we've been seeing for absentee voting, where it's not always something that's popular to do for conservatives. And for me, if you want to go and vote on election day, we're happy to have you do that, but maybe help get some of your friends and family or neighbors who don't always vote, to get them to vote by absentee or early vote, because we're banking those votes, and it's a lot cheaper for us to spend campaign money targeting those voters who have registered to get their absentee ballot to help get that ballot back in than it is waiting to try and spend that money for people that are voting on election day. We can target that money much more efficiently, and so it can also help our candidates that are running for legislative and statewide offices to be more successful.
Eric Toney is the Fond du Lac County District Attorney up there north of the Cheddar Curtain in Wisconsin. Eric Toney, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yep, thanks so much for having me. Have a great weekend.
You too. Good luck at the convention. Have fun. And you join us on the Turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
It is no coincidence that our present troubles parallel and are proportionate to the intervention and intrusion in our lives